Reformers need a plan B. Reformers need to know this is what we want, this is what we'll take. The problem is always if you put what you'll take on the table, all the opposition, all those who are wary, go right there, you're never going to get what you want. And yet if you keep what your bottom line is off the table, you may never get there. The vote comes down on something bigger. I remember working for President Clinton, and one of the problems he failed was because he asked those of us working for him early on, he said, I want you to tell me this, what's the best thing we can do for American healthcare? What's the least thing we can do that would still be an improvement? He never got the answer to the second question because the leadership of the reform effort was afraid to put that on the table. If everybody knew what the least was, that's what we were going to get, and he wanted more than that. And reformers may have grand goals, but the rules, the 60 votes, the 2/3 vote in California compel compromise. Finally, I think we have problems with the message. It's hard. Obama's trying to sell cost and coverage, but it's hard to sell both at the same time. We need to reduce costs, but we're going to cover 47 million people. Well, and the public says, well, how are we going to do that? Especially when I don't see any cost control here. So you're trying to drive, in two directions at the same time, and I think it's led to a murky message, and I think nobody really knows what health reform is about. It's getting better now, but I think we've really suffered from that. Now here are some numbers that, that might help put some detail on this. Here are the top lobbying industries in 2008. Now this is not health industry, this is all industries. And you can see how prominent the health reform lobby, much of it not historically positive towards health reform is. Pharmaceuticals #1, insurance is #3, business associations, chambers, opposed to employer mandate #4, hospitals and nursing homes 10, health professionals, health HMOs. You can see there's a lot of muscle on the side, not all of it opposition, and I think that's to the reform proponents' great credit. Not all of it opposition this year. Here you see the fundamentals of the economic problem. The larger line in almost every case except the middle of the 1990s is inflation. The next line, the smaller number, is premiums. This is the fundamental economic problem we have. Premiums, healthcare costs are rising 2-3 times the rate of inflation. Overall, that means more and more money is going to healthcare relative to other things. Everything else gets squeezed. Healthcare costs go up. That's the nature of the problem, both in the private sector for employers and in the public sector in Medicaid, Medicare, SCHIP, veterans, etc., all facing the same underlying pressures. I created this slide because I think it shows how much more difficult this is than it was just 7 years ago. If you look at 250% of poverty in the year 2000 was $44,000. You might have been able to say in 2000, $44,000 is enough income for you to be able to afford health insurance, especially when you saw the premiums at $5,844 for a family premium. You may have been asking people to pay 13% of their income for health care if they had to buy it on their own. In 2007, by contrast, 250% of poverty has just gone up $7,000 or 17%. HMO premiums have gone up 100% plus. With the result that if you wanted to say to people now, 250% of poverty, you have to buy health insurance on your own, you'd be asking people to pay 23% of their income for health care. I think everybody knows that's not possible. Which is why we're now talking about subsidizing people, not to 250% of poverty, but 400% of poverty. Which means we're subsidizing half the country or more into health insurance. So that's why I think Obama and others have it right when they say cost is the #1 question. 56% red at the top is the percent who support universal health insurance, something like a Medicare for all. And on the right, the percent who support the current system. So people say, yeah, we want reform. They may even want something dramatic like Medicare for all. But then when you say to them, would you support universal health insurance if it meant you had to pay higher premiums and more taxes? You're at 35% already. 20% down, just as people, oh, it's me that has to pay? So this is part of the public opinion problem. So what's on the table right now in Washington? I would say this is what I learn every time I study healthcare reform. It is all about the money. Again, I excluded the big value question at the beginning, but when you look at reform, it's all about the money, all about the interests, looking at what does this mean for my bottom line. And no one's excluded from this. Even the community clinics, the great safety net, those who really support universal coverage, those who care for the neediest, have the best of values, can't help but think, what happens to me? If everybody has insurance, what happens to my business? Can I compete in the private sector? Can I get Blue Cross to give me contracts and Blue Shield to give me contracts? Because they're going to have all the bodies. So nobody's exempt from this, even the most noble amongst us. On the funding of reform, the biggest questions right now, who's going to pay? Do we have an individual mandate? It looks that way, but how stiff is it going to be? And as it works its way through Congress, it's likely to get limper and limper as people get more worried. Are we going to have an employer mandate? It looks that way, but it's likely to get limper and limper. And where are we going to get new money for funds for the Medicaid expansion plan? So what are the new sources of funding? These are the controversy issues. These are what's on the table right now. Are we going to tax high-income individuals, as the House would do? Maybe, but the tax is going to get limper as we go through it. Are we going to tax the Cadillac high insurance plans? I've always liked this one. Labor hates it, which means the Democrats can go just so far on it. So that's going to get limper if it survives. Savings in government programs. Obama's promising great savings in Medicare. Well, that's keeping him from getting seniors on board. And these questions of funding will determine how many people get coverage. The CBO yesterday said the Baucus bill gives about what? Gets 27 million of the 47 million covered. How many and who will be required to purchase insurance? And what will they be required to pay? And what benefits will they get? Will they be entitled to? In the Clinton health reform, this was one of the biggest issues. Okay, we're guaranteeing people health insurance. What does that mean? Is it comprehensive? Is it limited? Does it have a big deductible? Is it minimal? Is it everything? These are huge issues, and I can guarantee you the price tag will go up as they resolve these things. So the other issues on the table, the public option, it's already come up this morning, and I'm sure it'll come up again. But what's interesting is Gloria and I sit on the LA Care Board of Directors. No one is discussing the other kinds of options of public plans other than the one giant Medicare-like plan run out of Washington. LA has a great health plan, doing all kinds of good things, and it is a public plan. And this is just not on anyone's agenda. And there are other public plans like this, other community-based, not-for-profit plans around the country run by people like you, and none of it seems to be on the table. It's only this one giant Medicare for all type thing, and that's disappointing. Politics, do they get 60 votes? It looks like yes. And I think the interesting thing is you never know what happens in politics, but I think the Republicans may have overplayed their hand saying no. They've said no so firmly and so loudly to everything that they're forcing the Democrats, perhaps, into a more partisan stance than many Democrats would like to take. It's going to be very difficult for some moderate or conservative Democrat to look the other 58 Democrats in the face and say, I'm not voting for this, after what the other side has done. And so it's interesting you now see Republicans like Bob Dole coming out of the woodwork saying, negotiate, guys. This is going to pass. Let's at least get out what we don't like. So that's a very interesting about. Probable outcomes, I think they're going to pass something. I think that's clearly in the works. The question is, what is it? Maybe I'm too, maybe I've lost so many times on this issue that my bar is too low. Right? But my attitude is almost anything substantial that gets a lot of people insured, that corrects the insurance reform rules, and that gets something on track to deal with costs. It doesn't have to get cost containment now, but it gets something in place so that we can work at that over time. It would be an extraordinary success given American politics and the American rules of the game and American values. That would be an extraordinary success. Maybe my bar is too low.